I saw a tweet the other day that stopped me in my tracks. It said, sorry to say this, but a $200,000 income is now middle class. A person making $200,000 is taking home about $10,500 a month after tax. Median spending by a US family with 2 kids is $8,600. This leaves $2,000 for savings, investing, and special purchases. Middle class. Honestly, besides the way they write, which annoyed me, I had to sit with that for a little while because growing up, $200,000 was rich. Even in my business, that's been the number to hit that would make me wealthy. Even in my mind now, it's still rich. It's what my doctor friends make, and it's the huge number that all the higher ups used to make when I started working. Now we're saying it's just middle class? It's just basic? Let's unpack this together and talk about what's middle class and whether or not $200,000 is actually middle class or not. Because a generation ago, making 6 figures, just $100,000 a year was a milestone. It meant you had arrived, you had made it, your career was amazing, and you're solidly upper class, upper middle class, maybe even considered wealthy in your community. Fast forward to now, and $100,000 has basically become the new baseline for middle class in many places, and it's not that exciting when someone says they finally hit 6 figures. And now we're seeing the same shift with $200,000 in income as well. So what has happened? Basically inflation, pricing for housing, healthcare, childcare, education, everything has skyrocketed in the last few years. Life is more expensive. There's also lifestyle creep. So what used to be luxuries, things that not everyone had, things like smartphones, streaming services, multiple cars are now pretty standard expenses. The standard of our lifestyles has just gone up. And then finally, location, because where you live matters more than ever. $200,000 in many places in the US does still feel like a lot of money. It does. In fact, where I live, that's still a lot of money, but in a higher cost of living area, it's pretty middle class, and it also might leave you scraping by. But in a higher cost of living area, that amount can be very middle class. Let's also agree that the term middle class generally describes a class, a population of people in the middle of the social hierarchy in a country. It's often defined by occupation, income, education, and social status. It's widely debated, but a good benchmark that's used in the US uses a household income between 2/3 and double the area's median income to help define this. However, middle class is definitely not defined only on income. It also includes aspects like home ownership, disposable income for luxuries, vacations, and the ability to live a comfortable lifestyle in a level of economic security. So that is all something that you have to take in mind when you think about middle class. It's really hard to define just on income. I dug into an article from Go Banking Rates that back this up. They looked at the 50 largest US cities and asked the question, where could someone make $200,000 a year and still be considered middle class based on that income? There's obviously several places that they found where this is the case. Their definition of middle class was an income that is 2/3 to double the area's median household income, which has been a very standard benchmark for many different publications and surveys and things like that. Obviously, based on the premise of this video, you're not going to be surprised by the results, but for me, it's still kind of shocking. In Scottsdale, Arizona, the median household income is $104,197. The middle class range there is $69,465 up to $208,394. So you could be making over $200,000 and still be middle class in Scottsdale, Arizona. In Plano, Texas, the median household income is $105,679. The middle class range is $70,453 to $211,358. And then a pretty good typical example of a higher cost of living area, which the others were as well, but this one is one I always think of, is Seattle, Washington. And the median household income there is $116,068. And the middle class range in Seattle is $77,379 to $232,106. That obviously shows that the location very much makes a difference, because if you're making $230,000 where I live in Tennessee, you are going to be a little bit above middle class. You're going to be upper middle class and doing well. But in other words, if you lived in those cities, in those specific locations and made $200,000, you are pretty solidly in the middle class range. You're kind of at the top, but you're still middle class. In places like California, nearly half the cities on the list were in California, which isn't surprising given the cost of living in a state like California. There, you have to make a much higher income to be middle class, and with the housing costs and all of the other costs in that area, $200,000 does not stretch as far as it would somewhere like Tennessee. Let's break all of this down into real numbers and what it looks like. So if you are making $200,000 a year after taxes, you're bringing home around $10,500 a month based on the tweet that we saw. Obviously, this is also something that is very different based on location, because in California, you will have more taxes. But in other areas, like my state, we don't have a state income tax. So we bring home a little bit more in our paychecks than somewhere that does have a state income tax. So there are 1,000 different factors based on income and all of the different situations based on your location to get this number. But we're going to use 10,500 as the standard just because that's what the tweet used as well. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median US family with 2 kids spends about $8,600 a month. And I'll be honest, that's pretty much what we spend almost every month. It's been pretty similar for the last couple of years. This past year, we've actually been spending more. The grocery costs have gone up. The typical stuff we buy has gone up. And then we did buy a bigger house. So we've spent more than that. But that's a pretty good average, I think, if you have a family of 4, $8,600 every single month. That leaves just $2,000 for saving, investing in extras if you are bringing home that $10,500 every single month. If you're spending $8,600 and you also have $2,000 for savings and all of that, you are comfortable. You're pretty comfortable. You're not scraping by. This is not like a poverty lifestyle, obviously. You're able to save money. You can cover most expenses. You are not scared that you're going to be on the street the next month. But you're not necessarily rich either, especially if you live in one of those higher cost of living cities like San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, any of those places, any of the high cost of living areas. You're probably not feeling very wealthy despite making $200,000 a year. Before we all spiral, let's be clear, $200,000 in household income, which is what we're talking about, is still a lot of money compared to the national average of income. I honestly think still $100,000 in household income in a lot of places goes really far, and $200,000 is pretty good. What this shows us is that the definition of middle class has shifted, and it's very hard to pinpoint because it keeps going up, and it's less about the specific number and more about how far your money can stretch based on where you live. So online, when people start arguing about whether or not $100,000 per year or $200,000 per year is middle class, or if it's enough money or if it's basically nothing, you have to remember that this is so location specific. In certain parts of the country, $200,000 can make you feel so wealthy. In others, it just barely covers the basics of a normal middle class lifestyle, the mortgage, the childcare, the transportation, the healthcare, your food, all of that in a pretty small house. The real win here is if you can make that $200,000 in household income a year and still live in a lower cost of living area. That's where you have a wide enough gap in cost of living and your income to be able to save a huge amount and invest that money every single month. That will build wealth over time. So you go from having a high income to actually building real wealth versus having a high income and struggling to get by and feeling very middle class or even falling behind if you have a lot of debt. For me, some big takeaways from all of the articles I read about this are that middle class is not just a readily accepted number. It's about cost of living and specific location along with your income. And many people will disagree with what middle class actually is, no matter what number you use. In fact, the middle class finance subreddit that I am part of is mainly just people arguing over what is middle class or not. And people are going to constantly disagree no matter what the income number is or what the assets and lifestyle looks like. It's just something that is not readily accepted because everyone wants to consider themselves middle class, even if people are making a lot of money and are way above middle class. And of course, $200,000 stretches very differently in Mississippi than it does in Manhattan. So location is super important. But no matter what your income is, building financial security and exiting middle class and becoming financially secure and even becoming upper middle class and having a huge nest egg, no matter what your income is, building financial security in the middle class or moving up to upper middle class, it comes down to the same basic principles that we talk about here on the channel all the time. Budgeting your money, saving your money, investing your money, and avoiding lifestyle creep and debt. Those things can help you get to the place you want to be. And yes, $200,000 may now be middle class in certain areas, but that does not mean it's not an incredible opportunity to use that money to build wealth if you're intentional. Remember that plenty of families are living well below that income, and it's definitely possible to have way less money and still find the gap between your expenses and your income so that you can invest and build wealth. If you make make $200,000 and can live with a lower spending every month, then you can save and invest pretty aggressively and build real financial freedom in a shorter amount of time, regardless of your location. I would love to know your thoughts. Is $200,000 per year in income in a household middle class? It really depends on where you live and how you spend and what you consider middle class, but I would love to hear from you what you think based on where you live. It's clear that the goalposts are going to constantly shift on what is middle class, and that is something that happens as inflation increases wages and our cost of living. The best thing any of us can do, whether we make $50,000 per year or $200,000 per year, is to live intentionally, avoid debt, and focus on investing to build those assets for the future. So let me know if $200,000 feels middle class where you live. For me, it still feels like a lot of money. Every time I see the conversation on a subreddit or online in someone's comments, I'm like, are you serious? $200,000 is still rich in my mind. It's still a lot of money, and we would be investing so much more and building so much more wealth if we were over that for our household income every single year. I think it's a big number, but I would love to know what you think, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video over here.